In the year 1227, during the second year of the Mongol invasion of Western Xia, the battlefield lay silent, littered with corpses. A lone horseman moved slowly across the field, his eyes scanning the remnants of war. Eventually, he reached a tent guarded by 2 warriors. Dismounting, he approached with purpose and announced his arrival. The guards allowed him to enter. Inside, the Khan greeted him by name, Subutai. The general stepped forward, expressing concern about the Khan's health. Having heard rumors of a recent fall from his horse, the Khan, however, brushed past the question, instead inquiring if the medicine was ready. Subutai brought news from Rus. Prisoners had spoken of a disease that had long plagued Khwarazm, a disease that slowly rotted the body and caused the skin to burn upon exposure to sunlight. He suggested sending another expedition there, but the Khan interrupted him. There was no time. He revealed that it had been 4 years since he had been infected. The reason he summoned Subutai now was not for strategy or conquest. It was to have a final witness. The Khan confessed that in truth, he had died a long time ago. As he stepped forward, the decay of his body became painfully clear. His flesh was rotting, falling apart with every motion. He admitted to something even more horrifying. He had eaten his own adjutant the previous night. What disturbed him most wasn't the act itself, but the taste of the blood. It had been too sweet. The Khan took his hat off, exposing himself to the harsh sunlight. Subutai, alarmed, urged him to put his hat back on, concerned for his safety, but the Khan ignored the plea. He spoke of the life he had lived, one spent on horseback, forging a vast empire that would never be matched. He refused to let his final image be that of a monstrous creature. He would not allow history to remember him in such a way. As the sun's rays broke through, his body began to burn away. He declared that he would be remembered as the great Khan forever. Subutai watched as the last traces of life faded from the Khan's body. Shortly after, Subutai exited the tent and ordered the commanders to be informed. The Khan had passed away. The body would be returned, but precautions would be taken. 2 identical decoy carriages would be placed before and after the one carrying the Khan's remains to conceal its identity. 1,000 of their most trusted elite troops would guard each carriage. He gave further orders. Any living being encountered during the Khan's funeral procession was to be killed without hesitation. Birds in the sky, livestock, plants, nothing was to be spared. No witnesses were to remain, no matter how insignificant. The burial site of the Khan was to remain a secret for all eternity. After the burial, 1,000 horses would run over the grave until the land was perfectly flat. Once all procedures were complete, even the workers involved were to be executed. The illusion must remain flawless. As far as the world would ever know, the Khan's body had never existed. "15 years later, in 1242, in Hungary, at the Mongol Expeditionary Force camp in Europe, prisoners sat in chains behind bars. Among them, one whispered to another, questioning why they were taken alive. The Tatars were known to leave no survivors. Why had they been spared, treated, even healed? Perhaps the rumors of their cruelty were false. But another prisoner, older, more hardened, warned against such hope. Others had been captured before them. Each was called in turn, asked incomprehensible questions. Those who failed to answer properly were killed in horrific ways. Their fate, he believed, would be no different. Suddenly, the door to the holding cell opened. A guard stepped inside, his expression unreadable as he raised his spear and pointed it at one man. His voice rang out, commanding Herman to come forward. Herman stood and obeyed. As he walked, he bowed his head and whispered a prayer beneath his breath. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. He was brought into a tent. Inside, a figure sat upon a throne-like seat made of fur hide. Another elderly man approached the seated figure, and the two exchanged a few words before the elder turned to Herman and questioned him. Herman gave his full name, Herman Koch, and identified himself as a member of the medical unit of the Teutonic Order. The elder inquired about his role, confirming whether he treated injured soldiers. Herman answered that it was his divine duty, according to the Lord's will, to save all people from disease. The elder turned back to the seated figure and relayed the information. A command was given. The guard stepped forward and pulled aside a curtain that had been hiding a cage. Within the cage was a monstrous figure. Herman's eyes widened in shock at the sight of the creature. The man on the chair spoke. If Herman truly dealt with diseases, then surely he knew of the disease that turned men into monsters. The figure demanded an explanation. Had Herman seen such a monster before? Did he know of this condition? He was told to speak everything he knew, or there would be no reason to keep him alive. Again, the demand came. Everything about the disease was to be shared. If Herman could not answer, he would be cut into pieces and thrown to the monster as food. As Herman stared at the monster trapped inside the cage, General Subutai waited patiently for his response. Herman finally identified the creature as one of the undead, beings who cannot die, even after being killed. A translator relayed his words to Subutai, who gestured for Herman to continue. Herman explained that it was not a plague but rather a devil's curse. He spoke of an ancient legend from the region, one that spoke of fog near the Sayogang River. According to the legend, if a warrior died near the river and was exposed to the fog on a full moon night without being buried, they would rise again and become part of the devil's army. These resurrected beings returned without souls, driven by a single purpose: to tear apart and kill people. Everything, Herman concluded, was the work of the devil. Subutai took in this grim explanation and turned to the translator, who then asked Herman how one could kill such a creature. Herman replied that since they were already dead, they couldn't be killed in the traditional sense. However, during the day, they would burrow underground and lie motionless like corpses. That would be the opportunity to destroy them, either by burning their bodies or removing their heads. The translator turned to Subutai again, asking what should be done next. Subutai remained silent, lost in a memory. In that memory, soldiers stood at the ready, their eyes fixed on a carriage. Tension filled the air. Then suddenly the carriage burst open. A clawed hand shot out, followed by a grotesque monster that began ripping through the soldiers with terrifying ease. Subutai, watching from horseback, looked on in horror. He watched the Khan himself consume the men. A soldier rushed up to Subutai, panicked, and shouted about the Khan. Subutai ordered him to shoot. The soldier, shocked, hesitated. Subutai reminded him that the Khan had passed away half a day ago. He refused to believe that the Grey Khan had become a monster that devoured human flesh. He gave the command to seal him again and bury him. Arrows flew at the Khan, and chains tipped with hooks were launched to restrain him. Returning to the present, the translator once again asked what should be done with Herman. Subutai ordered that he be placed in solitary confinement. The translator acknowledged the command, and Herman was escorted out. Subutai remained in his tent, steeped in silence. Later, Subutai sat on his chair when someone entered the tent. It was Boto, summoned at Subutai's request. Subutai welcomed him, acknowledging his bravery. Though Boto was of Yemek origin, many said he was braver than any Mongol warrior. Boto humbly responded to the praise. Subutai explained that he had a special mission for Boto, one of utmost secrecy. He revealed that a reconnaissance team had recently been dispatched to scout the area, but never returned. Boto volunteered to lead a follow-up unit immediately, but Subutai stopped him. He had already conducted an investigation. According to the report, the missing troops had turned into monsters, creatures that bit and consumed human flesh indiscriminately. Arrows and swords had no effect on them. Even the lone survivor who brought back the report eventually became a monster. When Boto asked what his mission would be, Subutai told him the monsters were slowly advancing toward their camp. He assigned Boto the role of monster hunter. Boto reminded him that the monsters couldn't be killed by normal means. But Subutai assured him he would provide an expert, referring to Herman. Later, men rode on horseback. Herman, riding along, questioned the translator about their destination. The translator told him they were going to hunt the undead. In disbelief, Herman muttered that everyone had gone completely mad. Subutai watched in silence as the group rode off into the distance. Once they were gone, he gave a decisive command. The entire army was to prepare for immediate withdrawal. One of his men offered to relay the message to Commander Boto, but Subutai interrupted, demanding that it be done immediately. The soldier hesitated, trying to protest, but Subutai cut him off. He warned that by the following day, they would no longer be there. This land, he declared, was cursed. In the year 1242, the Mongol army, which had just triumphed over Poland and Hungary and stood at the doorstep of the Holy Roman Empire, vanished overnight. No one knew the reason. Only the hunters carried the secret of that day. As the group moved forward on horseback, one of the riders noted that the traces of the undead led straight to the village. Captain Boto gave an order to Eden Yargal, instructing her to check for any ambushes ahead. She responded respectfully, calling him father, and proceeded to scout the area. As they passed through the empty village, someone watched them from the shadows. A soldier spotted the figure and quickly seized her, only to realize it was just a young girl. Eden Yargal reported that the village was completely deserted. The girl pulled out a knife in an attempt to stab the man holding her, but before she could strike, Eden Yargal stepped in and caught her hand, squeezing until the knife fell to the ground. Boto instructed her to release the child and she obeyed. Herman, observing everything, turned to the interpreter and asked about the towering woman. The interpreter identified her as Eden Yargal, Captain Boto's daughter, and warned Herman not to call her a giant carelessly. She was known to crush skulls with her bare hands. Though, the interpreter chuckled. It probably didn't matter, since she wouldn't understand him anyway. The girl was thrown to the ground, and Boto ordered the translator to ask her about the missing villagers. Complying, the translator gently asked the child where all the adults had gone and why she was the only one left behind. The girl spat back that the Tatar bastards had killed them all. The translator responded calmly, clarifying that this was their first time in the village and that what she had seen wasn't the Mongol army. Turning to Boto, he explained that it appeared a horde of undead had swept through the area, He then asked the girl when a group resembling theirs had passed through. Her answer was chilling. They hadn't left. When he asked again, she confirmed that they were still there. A sudden sound drew Boto's attention. A figure appeared from around the corner and slowly stepped into view. It was a strange creature. It growled and then charged the group. One of the archers immediately fired an arrow, bringing the creature down. Boto then turned to Herman and sarcastically asked for expert advice on how to kill the undead. The creature growled again, startling the group. Boto urged everyone to remain calm and reminded them that their expert knew how to deal with the monster. He pressured Herman to speak quickly before the creature attacked again. Herman closed his eyes and admitted he didn't know. Boto, taken aback, questioned him sharply. Herman confessed he had never claimed to be an expert. All the talk about the undead had been made up. He had just recited local legends when Subutai threatened to kill him. Just then, the creature rushed forward again. One of the archers shot another arrow, but the monster continued its charge, grabbing the archer. Boto pointed his sword at Herman and demanded he make something up again. If he couldn't provide a legend about killing monsters, he would die. As the creature bit into the archer, Herman blurted out a desperate idea: cut off its head. If it had no head, it couldn't move. A sword was drawn, and the creature was swiftly beheaded. Its head rolled to the ground. The one who had struck the blow was the little girl. Boto stared at the child in silence. Another archer approached the wounded one and asked if he was all right, helping him up. The girl, however, raised her sword and pointed it at Boto with a fierce glare. Erdenjagel calmly stepped in and used her mace to knock the blade away. Boto, observing the girl, remarked that she had impressive strength with a blade for someone so young. Then, raising his voice to the group, he declared a change of plans. They would retreat to the outskirts of the village and set an ambush for when the undead appeared. Herman was shoved to the ground. Boto declared him a useless fraud and ordered that he be tied to a tree and used as bait. As they prepared to leave, the translator whispered to the girl, advising her to run when she got the chance. The group rode off, leaving Herman and the girl behind. As they watched the horses disappear into the distance, Herman turned to the girl and asked if she could untie him. She hushed him quickly. The fog, she said, was getting thicker. It had been the same with her village. The monsters had come with the fog. Herman, puzzled by her words, asked what she meant. The girl didn't elaborate. She simply said, in a calm and steady tone, that no one could escape from the fog. Meanwhile, back with Bodo's group, the archer, who had been bitten, showed the first signs of change, subtle at first, but unmistakably unnatural. Herman questioned the girl, trying to understand the nature of the creatures. She explained that they initially appeared only at night, but after the Tatars carried out a massacre, they began emerging during the day as well, always accompanied by the fog. Herman realized they were not ordinary undead. Creatures that could not die, moved only in darkness, and were obsessed with blood, reminded him of a legend. He suddenly understood what they were. These were not simple undead, they were vampir. Startled, the girl asked for clarification. Herman explained that the creatures didn't follow the fog, they feared the light. Their true identity was vampir, beings that constantly craved human blood, extremely powerful and demon-like, even among the undead. She questioned his credibility, noting that others had called him a fraud, but Herman insisted that this time he was telling the truth. They needed to inform the Mongols immediately. The girl resisted the idea of helping the Tatars, calling them bastards. Suddenly, noise echoed from the fog surrounding them. Herman warned that soon the Mongols themselves would become vampir and come for them. Meanwhile, within the fog, chaos broke out among the soldiers. warriors began transforming into monsters. The archer cried out, desperately trying to reach his companion, but the man had already transformed into a vampire. The creature lunged forward, sinking its fangs into the archer's flesh. Nearby, after slicing off a vampire's head, Boto called out to his men, urging them to regroup. They needed to retreat immediately. This cursed fog was clearly driving people mad. As they fought off the vampire, Boto took command of the chaos, instructing his warriors to aim for the creature's heads as much as possible. Erden Yargal reported that she believed they had cleared the area. One of the vampire crept up behind Erden Yargal, ready to strike. Before it could attack, a spear thrust forward and stabbed it through the mouth. Herman was the one who had driven the weapon in. He made it clear that the fog wasn't the cause. Herman warned them that if they didn't want to become monsters, they must avoid being bitten at all costs. The translator turned toward the girl and asked if she had untied the man they believed to be a fraud. In response, Erden Yargal seized Herman's weapon. Herman addressed the interpreter directly, urging him to relay the truth to the captain. These creatures were vampir, a dangerous breed of undead. If bitten, a person would either die from blood loss or survive only to become one of them. They fed on human blood to sustain themselves. Once thought to be mere legend, these monsters had awakened, drawn by the overwhelming scent of blood that now saturated the land. It was the Mongol army that had stirred them. Boto called out to Erden Yargal, and she responded without hesitation. He demanded to know how he could trust that this wasn't another lie. Herman stepped forward, insisting that if he were lying, he wouldn't have come to them. He would have already run away. He warned that more victims would only make things worse. The vampire feared the light, which meant the horde they had been searching for was right there, hidden within the fog. Before the scent of blood attracted them further, they needed to escape quietly. One soldier, groaning on the ground and unable to see, was swiftly stabbed in the head by Herman to prevent his transformation. Boto watched in silence. Herman addressed everyone, explaining that anyone who had been bitten even once had to be killed. He reminded them that they had all seen it with their own eyes. Once someone became a vampire, they became extremely difficult to kill. Anyone who had been bitten, even slightly, could not be spared. That was the only way any of them had a chance to survive. Herman's words hung heavy in the air. Boto froze for a moment, then closed his eyes and gave the order. The wounded were to be executed. One soldier, filled with sorrow, apologized as he struck down a fallen comrade. Boto warned Herman that if he was wrong, he would suffer a death that would carry the weight of every man Boto had killed. He then ordered a horse to be given to Herman. With urgency, Boto called for immediate departure and requested a status report. A soldier informed him that only 64 riders remained from the light and heavy cavalry. 30 men had disappeared in moments. Boto addressed the remaining soldiers. They would return to headquarters, reinforce their numbers, and come back to avenge the fallen. Moving quietly, they began their retreat. As the group faded into the mist, Vampir emerged from the fog, drawn to the corpses left behind. The little girl silently watched as the monsters fed. Herman urged everyone to keep moving, warning that the scent of blood was calling more of them in. As they advanced, more vampires slowly took shape in the fog. A soldier noticed some on horseback, including one with a sword still lodged in its skull. The translator cursed the cursed fog as he observed the creatures around them. One of the mounted vampire finally turned its attention toward the group. The vampire stared at the group and muttered something in a strange, guttural language. At its words, the other vampire halted and turned their focus toward the group as well. The soldiers froze, realizing that the vampire were now watching them intently. The interpreter wondered aloud why they had suddenly stopped, questioning if they weren't following the scent of blood. Herman answered with grim clarity, explaining that the reason vampire were the worst was because they could think, just like humans. Suddenly, the vampire fired arrows at the group. Boto shouted for everyone to run, and they rode off quickly. Arrows tore through the air, one hitting a soldier and another striking the interpreter. Dazed from the impact, the interpreter faltered, until Erden Jargal snapped at him to regain focus. Boto urged the group to hurry and escape the fog. As they fled, Vampire on horseback gave chase. The little girl glanced back and noticed something eerie about the horses, telling Herman that the steeds looked possessed. Boto shouted to increase their speed as the vampire closed in fast. One vampire jumped onto a soldier, biting deep into his flesh. Another slashed down a different soldier with a sword. A third reached for Erden Jargal, only to have its head smashed by her mace. Yet another lunged at Herman and the girl, but Boto's arrow struck it in the head. The vampire fell from its horse, motionless for a moment, then rose again with the arrow still embedded in its skull, roaring. The pursuit continued. One vampire caught another soldier and bit into him, as someone shouted that the rear guard had been caught. The creature ripped the soldier's head off, and another vampire joined it to devour the corpse. Up front, Erden Jargal struck down another vampire, then told Herman, the expert, to stay close to the front while she handled the rear. Suddenly, an arrow struck her in the eye. More arrows followed, embedding in her back. Boto shouted her name in alarm as she slumped on her horse. The vampire began speaking again in their bizarre language. Herman wondered if it was giving orders, questioning whether the vampire actually had a command structure. More arrows flew at the group. One soldier's horse was struck, causing the man to tumble to the ground, and in an instant, a vampire pounced on him and began devouring him. Moments after the chaos, one of the survivors reported to Boto that they had escaped the fog. Boto looked at Erden Jargal and urged her to hold on a little longer, promising they would soon reach headquarters. But as he looked at her condition, he cursed under his breath. Then the interpreter cried out. The headquarters was gone. Boto responded in disbelief, repeating the word. They rode to the site, only to find it completely deserted. As the group searched the area, a soldier muttered that it couldn't be, and the interpreter echoed in disbelief. Herman dropped to the ground and started to laugh. The interpreter asked what was so funny. Herman replied that their captain wasn't Mongolian. When he spoke to his daughter, they used a language Herman had never heard before. Addressing the interpreter by name, he noted that Ruslan was from Rus. He pointed out the Africans in the group, calling them freed Arab slaves once used as arrow fodder. He mentioned the Persians too, stating there wasn't likely a single pure Mongol among them. Reflecting on Subutai, Herman recalled how the old man never believed a word he said. But it didn't matter, he continued, because not a single drop of Mongol blood was ever meant to be spilled. Herman asked if they truly understood what was happening. While they, the innocent fools, were buying time against the vampire, the main force had already withdrawn. Subutai, that cunning old fox, had left them behind. As Herman continued, Ruslan snapped at him, demanding to know what he was trying to say and if he had a death wish. But Herman only looked at him with cold detachment and said that Ruslan still didn't understand. They had all been abandoned. They weren't monster hunters. They were just bait. From the beginning, Herman had believed they were merely disposable pieces, cards to be discarded in order to protect the elite Mongol troops. One of the soldiers, confused by his words, asked Ruslan what Herman was saying, urging him to translate because it sounded serious. Before Ruslan could respond, Boto struck Herman in the face and ordered him to be tied up again. Boto told Ruslan there was no longer any need to translate what Herman said. He then commanded the group to gather the remaining materials to set up the gers and build a palisade, declaring that they would camp there for the night. The group began working quickly, laying out the defenses. Herman, unconscious and tied up, was watched closely by the little girl who remained near him. Inside a nearby tent, Ruslan and Boto discussed their situation. Ruslan acknowledged that Herman was right. It was true the main force had abandoned them. He asked Boto what he planned to do. Boto answered that he had only one plan: to survive the night. If they survived tonight, then they would focus on surviving tomorrow, and if they made it through that, then the day after. Survival came first, and he would decide what to do next when the time came. Ruslan suggested that it might be better to follow the main force while they still could. But Boto questioned whether Ruslan truly believed the same main force that had abandoned them would accept them back. Ruslan remained quiet for a moment, then admitted that the main force would probably attack them, fearing they might have turned into monsters. Boto asked what forces they had left. Ruslan responded that there were 31 people, including the wounded like himself, but added that for every soldier they had lost, their enemy had grown by that much. Elsewhere in the camp, Herman was roused with a tap to the face by a soldier. He was led to a tent where Erden Yargal lay unconscious. Ruslan reminded Herman that he had once served as a medical officer and explained that she had passed out after losing a lot of blood while removing arrows from her side and shoulder. Ruslan instructed him to save her. Herman began to protest, saying he needed his tools and her bag, but Ruslan cut him off, warning him that Erden Yargal's fate would soon become his if he failed. Then Ruslan turned and walked away, leaving Herman alone. Herman slowly entered the tent, muttering to himself to stay calm. He reminded himself to remove the arrow lodged in her eye and quickly stop the bleeding. She had already lost too much blood, but there was no other choice. He cursed the Tatars under his breath, then reassured himself that everything was according to God's will. Positioning himself over her body, he grasped the arrow and pulled it from her eye. Erden Yargal awoke instantly and grabbed Herman by the throat. Struggling for air, Herman begged her to calm down and insisted he was trying to help her. He reached for a cloth to stop the bleeding, while noting with disbelief how strong she was. Even as she choked him, he continued treating her. A scream erupted from the tent as he worked on her. Outside, the little girl caught the eye of one of the soldiers, who smiled at her. She turned her head away disinterestedly, unaffected by his charm. As she turned, she noticed a horse emerging from the forest. She stared at it, watching its strange movements. The horse walked slowly forward, and then, suddenly, the light vanished from its eyes. Its body began to thin rapidly, as if all its energy was draining away, and then it collapsed. Curious, the girl walked over for a closer look and stared down at the seemingly lifeless horse. Back in the tent, Herman lay unconscious, but then slowly opened his eyes. Realizing he was still on top of Erden Yargal, he quickly pushed himself off and rubbed his sore throat, where she had been choking him. His eyes drifted to the knives hidden on her thighs, and an idea formed in his mind. Outside the tent, a soldier stood guard, unaware, as Herman crept up behind him with one of the knives in hand, ready to strike.